Hi everyone. So, somatic movement, just one of many fabulous movement practices out there, right? So, is somatic movement just yoga in disguise, or insert movement practice of choice in there? So I was so downhearted once when I got to the end of teaching a class, and this was to people completely new to somatic movement. And one lovely person said, "Well, it's a lot like yoga, Emily." And I was like, "Oh no." Now, thankfully, I am much better now at communicating the sort of what and the why of somatic movement. This was much earlier on in my teaching life, and I really hadn't managed to get across clearly the unique elements of teaching somatic movement. It's easier to commit to some somatic movement practice over a few months and kind of see how it's different for yourself, experience that. It does take a little bit of time to kind of settle into it. But I'm going to give it a go now to explain to you why it is actually different. So, the first thing, and this is a very sort of overarching view of somatic movement, the intention with somatic movement is different to that of other movement practices. So you might do a movement that looks and maybe feels similar to, or even the same as some of those that you might find in another practice, but the intention with which we do that movement is quite different. So it's very exploratory. It's not that we have an aim to get into a particular position or to do something even really in a certain way. It's much more about how we experience what we're doing. So I might cue a position that I want you to be in, or I might cue a way that I want you to do it. But actually, the important bit is what you sense as you do the movement. So we're trying to understand ourselves better in terms of how we move, in terms of what serves us well and what doesn't in our movement or our positioning, our posture, in terms of where we as individuals carry muscle tension, which varies so much between each of us. We're trying to find out more about our movement habits, like the ways we move that we kind of almost fall into without realizing it, and how we can retrain the brain to move differently, to release muscle tension, to have the muscles contract more efficiently and then let go when they're done. It's much less of a movement practice really than it is a movement education, where we learn about our own individual somas, our living bodies as we experience them from the inside. So the goal really is kind of to experience what we experience and to sort of learn something from that. When we learn something, we can then make changes. And that's one of the reasons you'll hear, if you attend a somatic movement class, you'll hear lots of questions which invite you to notice your own unique experience of the movement that you're exploring. You don't have to answer them out loud, don't worry. They're just for reflection. But you'll hear lots of questions to kind of get you to really dig a little deeper into, how is this for me? So another key difference in somatic movement is that it uses the technique of pandiculation. So this is a natural technique that we all do, although much less than we helpfully could, particularly as adults. It's how the brain resets the resting level of tension in the muscles. So imagine, if you will, a dog or a cat. They get up after a sleep and they do what we usually call a stretch, right? What they're actually doing is pandiculating. So, and you can do this along with me if you like, they are tightening muscles and then they're releasing them. And what this does is it actually reminds the brain to let go of any muscle contraction that it doesn't need in that given moment. And that is another thing that is different about somatic movement, is that we are intentionally trying to get into the sensory motor feedback loop so that we can change the resting level of tension in our muscles. I'm not going to go into masses of detail, but over time, muscles get held with habitual levels of tension, and the nervous system is doing that holding. It forgets how to let go. We have what we call sensory motor amnesia, so we forget how to sense and move the muscles at will. So we get into that sensory motor feedback loop with techniques like pandiculation to reset the resting level of tension. Another thing that's different about somatic movement is that we use the concept of the 3 reflexes as described by Thomas Hanna, who came up with somatic movement. And we kind of use those to understand about our muscle tension holding patterns in the soma, so that we can learn to release them. Until we bring our own patterns to our conscious awareness, we cannot let them go. So we, as I say, we use the 3 reflexes. I'll put a link to the video to that to describe it in more detail, so that you can get an understanding if you want to. But essentially we learn to understand the patterns of holding in our soma so that we can learn to change them if they're not serving us. All right, so a few of the ways in which somatic movement is different to other practices. As I say, I think there are a lot of really great movement practices out there, and I'm a big fan of Qigong, for example. Most of us will probably have, some other thing, that way in which we like moving. So it might be yoga or Tai Chi or Qigong or whatever it might be. And somatic movement gives us a fantastic foundation for any other movement practice or just day-to-day life, the movements we make in day-to-day life. So give it a try, give it a little bit of time to kind of sink in, develop your understanding of how it can support you, and you will really, really see how it is indeed very different from other movement practices. All right, that's it from me. I'll see you in the next video.